Now I'm going to share with you some of the very interesting lesser known remedies as well in your practice with hemorrhoids. I'll share with you 3 top medicines for bleeding hemorrhoids, which are some of my Indian drugs which have helped me in practice, which I've learned as an ancestral tip. Remember, the first one which works wonderfully is Blumia odorata. You'll find this in the Indian drug section of Boricae. Blumia odorata is a wonderful remedy for bleeding hemorrhoids. Remember, Blumia is a member of the Compositae family. Arnica is a member of the Compositae family, and many Compositae family members, they have a tendency to bleed. So Blumia odorata is a wonderful remedy for bleeding hemorrhoids or as well as for blood dysentery. So bleeding hemorrhoids as well as for blood dysentery. And it works wonderfully as an acute to stop the bleeding, as an acute I mentioned. And it's an Indian herb which has been used in Ayurvedic literature for hundreds of years. And it works wonderfully in practice as well. Blumia odorata works best in tincture or 6C, the lower potencies. If you're using tincture, 10 drops, half cup of water every 6 to 8 hourly, stop when the bleeding stops. Or 6C, 2 globules in a cup of water every 6 to 8 hourly, again stop when the bleeding stops. So Blumia odorata works wonderfully for bleeding hemorrhoids. The second member in this group is Cynodon dactylon. Cynodon dactylon is prepared from the Indian herb durba, and it's again been used in Ayurveda for thousands of years to stop bleeding as a hemostat, which is very important for Cynodon dactylon. Cynodon is also a remedy for bleeding hemorrhoids. Bleeding hemorrhoids, blood dysentery, Cynodon works wonderfully in such cases as well. And in case of Cynodon, it's also a hemostat to stop the bleeding. Many times in case of Cynodon, you can find epistaxis as well. Cynodon is a superb remedy which has an action on the nasal passages, and epistaxis is also helped wonderfully with Cynodon dactylon. The third remedy in this list for bleeding hemorrhoids, my friend, is millefolium. Now the difference between millefolium and other in this group, Blumia and Cynodon, is millefolium is a remedy for painless hemorrhoidal bleeding. Painless bleeding. So any bleeding, not just hemorrhoidal bleeding, but any bleeding, whenever it's painless, remember millefolium can work wonderfully in such cases. So there is not much to differentiate between Blumia and Cynodon, to be honest. Both are remedies for active bleeding, bright red bleeding. Blumia, being a member of the Compositae family, has a tendency for hemorrhage, whereas millefolium is specifically a remedy for painless bleeding. So patient will tell you, my bleeding is continuing, but there is no pain at all. You can use millefolium in tincture, 6C, 30C as well, as I mentioned. Blumia and Cynodon work specifically in tincture or 6C with wonderful results. Few other clinical tips which I'd like to share with you for hemorrhoids, which are few lesser known remedies, and I've had few good results with some of these. I must share that with you. Number 1 in this list is sedum acri. You'll find this in Boricae's Metromedica. Sedum acri is a remedy for hemorrhoids as well as anal fissures. And with sedum acri, you'll find constricting pains in the rectum. Constriction in the rectum. Constricted sensation lasts for hours after stool. Constriction sensation in the rectum which lasts for hours after stool. Now when the patient comes and tells you that I passed stool in the morning, this pain is continuing up to the afternoon and evening, remember few of your top remedies. You have that in nitric acid, you have that in sulfur, you have that in ignatia, you have that in ratania as well, where there is pain in the rectum which lasts for hours and hours and hours after stool, which is very, very important to understand. And it's a constricted sensation in the rectum. When your well-selected medicines have failed, think of sedum acri. It can help you in 6C, 30C as well with sedum. My second remedy in this list, again with very interesting results, is when patient comes and tells you that You have taken care of my pain of the rectum. You have taken care of my bleeding in the rectum. But just the engorgement, the swelling in the rectum is not going away. It's still swollen, and can you help me with reducing the engorgement of the rectum? So Negundium americanum is a remedy where you will find engorgement of the rectum. Engorgement of the rectum, swelling of the rectum. Pain can be there, but I've used it in cases where you have prescribed your nitric acid, you have prescribed your sulfur, pain has gone, bleeding has gone, you have gone up to the highest potencies, but now you are frustrated that everything is gone, but the hemorrhoidal swelling is not reducing completely. Negundium americanum in 30C can help you as an intercurrent to reduce the engorgement of the rectum, which is very important. The third remedy in this list, again, which has wonderful results, is Mucuna urens, M-U-C-U-N-A, Mucuna urens. No other remedy in the Metromedica will tell you that they have a hemorrhoidal diathesis. This is the only remedy in the Metromedica where you will find this mentioned, that is a hemorrhoidal diathesis, a tendency for hemorrhoids. Dr. Clark mentions the keynote of Mucuna is burning. So there is a lot of burning in the rectum. Now when you read any Metromedica, you will find Mucuna and dolichos as mentioned as very closely related remedy. Mucuna and dolichos are members of the same leguminosae, but there is symptomatic difference between dolichos and Mucuna. So hemorrhoidal diathesis is a tendency for hemorrhoids where the keynote is burning. Again, remember these remedies when your well-selected medicines have failed. You have failed with sulfur, you have failed with phosphorus, arsenic for great burning in the hemorrhoids. Remember, Mucuna can help you in practice in 30C for the hemorrhoidal diathesis. Number 4 in this list is not a lesser known remedy, but sometimes you can find cases of mucus piles where there is no bleeding, there is no pus, but there is constant discharge from the hemorrhoids. So the hemorrhoids are discharging continuously, just a watery discharge, and that is what we call as mucus piles. The top remedy for that, my friends, is antimcrude. When you come across cases of mucus piles, obviously if you have symptoms of antimcrude, think of antimcrude in such cases for mucus piles with a white coated tongue, with a strong craving for sour, with a stubborn nature, with a sentimental mood in the moonlight. Antimcrude can help you in practice with 30C and 200C. Many times you can find in practice, and this is very interesting, that with the hemorrhoids the patient is unable to stand. There is so much pain that he is unable to stand. And Dr. Lang mentions as a local application you can use Plantago. Plantago, I'm sure my friends who are following me know it's a remedy for toothache, for local application in toothache as well. But with Plantago, Dr. Lang mentions in his clinical tips that you can apply it locally when there is tremendous pain with the hemorrhoid that is scarcely able to stand. So put 10 drops in a bucket of water and ask the patient to sit as a sitz bath for the hemorrhoids, and Plantago can work very marvelously as a local application in such cases. And lastly, I'll share with you a very interesting clinical tip. Again, I got this from Guernsey's hemorrhoids. He mentions that cases of blind hemorrhoids, protruding hemorrhoids which do not bleed, and patient has tried hot water, cold water, nothing is giving him relief. He embarrassingly comes and tells you, very embarrassingly, he's ashamed to tell you of it, that I applied my own saliva on the hemorrhoids and I felt the pain was a little bit better. I'm very ashamed, very embarrassed to tell you this, but that's the truth. That application of saliva made it better. Remember, my friends, you have that in Bromium, where application of saliva makes the hemorrhoidal pain better. My reference for that is Guernsey's book on hemorrhoids, which is very important. I shared with you remedies for bright red bleeding, glumia odorata, cynodon dactylon. But remember, it's again not a lesser known medicine where you have dark bleeding, absolutely dark and black bleeding in hemorrhoids. Remember, Haemorrhoids is always at your rescue. Sore feeling in the anus, bruised feeling in the anus with dark hemorrhage. You have that, my friends, with Haemorrhoids, which is very, very important for such aspects. And lastly, to finish up, when you come across cases where you have hemorrhoids which looks like red cherries, you have that in diascoria. Your aloes was blue like bunch of grapes, muriatic acid was blue, but whenever hemorrhoids looks like red cherries, you have that with diascoria, which is a very important remedy as well with hemorrhoids. Piles looks like red cherries, so a lot of redness and congestion to a certain extent like sulfur, but again they are engorged, and cherry like swelling is there, so diascoria in that way is different. Sulfur will have just redness in the rectum with a lot of soreness, lot of burning, but with diascoria there is engorgement as well as there is swelling and looks like red cherries. Another term you'll find in the Metromedica is white piles. You have that with carboveg. White piles, my friends, is nothing but just the advanced variety of hemorrhoids where there's a lot of pain as well, which is referred to as white piles. So carboveg has white piles, but obviously we do not prescribe on that. You need a few other symptoms to complete the totality for carboveg. The remedies I mentioned to you as lesser knowns, bromium works well in 30C, 200C. Hamamelis you can use as a tincture, you can use in 30C and 200C for dark bleeding. Diascoria again 30C works well for the piles which looks like red cherries. Plantago is a local application, so tincture in a bucket of water for local application when the patient is unable to stand because of the pain. Mucus piles, antim crude I mentioned, but obviously with antim crude totality 30C, 200C works well. Mucuna works in 30C for a hemorrhoidal diathesis where the keynote is burning, which is important for your antim crude. I've shared with you a few medium size, few lesser known remedies. I've shared with you some interesting clinical tips for hemorrhoids as well. I'll come back to you again with a series on the greatest polycrests of hemorrhoids where I'll share with you sulfur, nitric acid. I'll share with you Naxomica, where those are arsenicum, where those are very important remedies for hemorrhoids. I will be sharing with you later on. Thank you very much. Long live Hanuman, long live Haemorrhoids.